The world is hurting right now, and it's time to rise up. As we lift ourselves up in body, mind, and spirit, we can reach out to others and be a light in a sea of darkness. Welcome to the Movement for Global Health with your host, Dr. Mary Zennett.
Here with us today is the lead researcher in a groundbreaking study for Alzheimer's disease. And we are so privileged today to introduce to you Dr. John Lewis. He was with us on previous videos, so please catch up with him. And he has so much to share with us. Thank you so much, Dr. John.
Thank you, Dr. Mary. It's great to be here with you again. I'm really excited for our next conversation.
It is. So today, you said something in one of the last videos, and it was the aloe vera that was used for the study. It's not just the aloe vera that might be growing in your garden. Not that that's not good, but there's something more to this aloe vera. So could you shed some light on this?
I would be happy to, and that's such a great question because many times when I'm either being interviewed or giving a lecture and I bring up aloe vera, people, I think most people automatically think of aloe vera just for a topical solution for a sunburn or a cut or a wound or something. And as you said, using the gel that way is a fine remedy. There's nothing wrong with that. And of course, Mother Nature has bestowed on us this plant, much like many of the other plants that we can utilize for health. It's just such a blessing for us. But very specifically to your question, the aloe vera, you have the outer leaf, you have the outer portion of the leaf. Then right below the leaf, on the outside, just below that, you have that latex material that obviously we don't want to consume. And then where the real good stuff is inside that gel. Now, of course, the gel doesn't just have the polysaccharide, right? I mean, it's got amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, minerals. I mean, it's got a whole host of nutrients that we can utilize. But, more specifically to, I guess you could say, close to my heart and close to your heart is the polysaccharides that we've worked with over the years. The beauty of the plant is that it provides us these things. But the detriment or the downside is because the gel is about 98.5, 99% water, it's not humanly possible to drink enough of that gel to get enough polysaccharide to have any kind of a therapeutic benefit. So going back to what I was saying earlier, where, if I'm talking about aloe vera, and then a lot of times I can see, like people, you can read people's faces, you can see the wheels turning and they're thinking, oh, this guy's talking about aloe vera, I'll just start drinking my aloe vera juice, like they think that, oh, well, that's really the remedy here. No, it's not. It's taking all that water out, getting rid of all that water. Now you have these materials that are left over, these different nutrients, and then extracting out those polysaccharides, getting them out of these other things, because we don't really, we can get our vitamins and our minerals and our fatty acids, our amino acids. We can get these things from lots of other foods. We don't need aloe vera for those. But that acetylated polymannose, that ace mannan, that mannose, it's got, as you know, several different synonyms that basically mean more or less the same thing. That's what aloe vera really gives us. And that's what we want to have in a concentrated form, primarily in a powder that you can then take in a dose that actually then feeds the cells, guided by the genes, of course, but feeds the cells to be able to allow the cells to do what they do so beautifully. And that's what we want from the aloe vera interleaf gel. We don't want all that other stuff. So it really is like a two-step process. It's taking the best of what Mother Nature gives us and then taking it one step further to pull out that one specific material from the aloe vera interleaf gel, and then concentrating that into a dose or an amount that then we can see benefit from.
Wow. So this is a highly evolved scientific process in which they get this, the interleaf gel, and then get the ace mannan. That's complicated.
That's right. So again, I mean, here in Miami, we have aloe vera growing in our backyard, but if we have a little burn or a cut or something, we go out and snip a leaf and apply a little bit of the gel to that topically. But by no means do I recommend saying, well, you're going to get enough of the acetylated polymannose in that gel as you would, say, in Daily Brain Care or in another product that has that concentrated polysaccharide in it. So yeah, it's a whole different context and a whole different way of looking at what Mother Nature provides for us.
So what are some of the functions of this ace mannan that is so helpful to the patients in the Alzheimer's study? Just if anybody hasn't looked at our previous interviews, Dr. Lewis studied patients with moderate to severe Alzheimer's, and for a period of 1 year, gave them this top quality supplement that included this ace mannan.
Yes.
And he measured, I mean, this is University of Miami study, very, very precision oriented. And you documented significantly, statistically and clinically significant improvement in those patients. And
That's right.
all they received that was different was the supplement, including this ace mannan.
That's right. And by the way, we didn't change anything else in the intervention. We didn't change their diet, their exercise or physical activity, their medications, their socialization. We didn't do any of that stuff. We simply added one more variable into their daily equation. So we controlled for all those external possibilities of other things having an impact.
Wow. So looking back, because it's still groundbreaking, like we've spoken about this, is that patients, because in the real world, you don't expect patients with moderate to severe Alzheimer's to get better.
That's right.
You were describing cognitive improvement, alertness, clarity, all of this. You just don't expect it.
No, you don't. It's such a terrible, tragic disease from, as you know, as a physician, from the conventional medical perspective, people are just basically throwing up their hands saying, I don't, what can I do? There are 5 FDA approved drugs for medication that basically delay progression of the disease for a few months, maybe a year if you're lucky. And then after that, the person just continues falling off the cliff. So from a conventional medical perspective, it's horrific. I mean, even cancer, actually, there are more conventionally efficacious treatments for cancer than there are for this terrible disease.
Right. And it's becoming more prevalent. The rates aren't going down, the rates are going up.
That's right. It's just continuing to take off. I mean, and again, we can't forget even having an efficacious treatment. We can't, I say we as a scientific medical community, we can't even come to an agreement on what actually causes the disease, right? I mean, people now are throwing around this new term type 3 diabetes to refer to Alzheimer's disease. I mean, it's just kind of, one more variation of really a lot of the same thing. But I think that, in my opinion, I don't know if you agree with me, but in my opinion, that's a gross oversimplification of this disease. It's not just type 3 diabetes. Certainly, neuroinflammation has a significant etiology or cause related to this. But to me, people running around, claiming it's type 3 diabetes, to me, that's a gross oversimplification.
Exactly. Now, what I would tell you is, like, you saw these benefits with the supplements. So are they describing the improvement with a quality supplement like ace mannan, and that's responsible for the improvement And so they're calling it type 3 diabetes. I'm not discounting any of that,
Right.
but you can't ignore the brain and the brain inflammation and the impact on all the other systems of the body.
That's right. Well, I would like to, if I may, I would like to address the question you posed just a moment ago about what is it that,
Yes.
from a mechanistic perspective, I think that's where you were going down, or, you know, what you were
Yes.
driving at regarding the mechanisms of the ACE mannan and why it's so beneficial for humans. And so just in our study alone, I mean, we've already mentioned the topical application for wound healing. I mean, that's, I think FDA even has some sort of a, it's not exactly a drug claim, but it's you know, the FDA has basically given their stamp of approval for, you know, whatever that's worth, that aloe vera can be used as a topical for wounds. So
Yes.
we know that's true. I mean, that's pretty historical, but very specifically to your question and the results in our study, I mean, we can hang our hat on at least 4 different things, actually 5 different things, if you bear with me for a second. First is the overall improvement in immune function. So again, as you know very well as a physician, our immune system is not just our first line of defense against invaders or pathogens. It's also, I like to refer to it as the conductor of the symphony, right? I mean, it's talking to all the other major organ systems, and it's helping to keep everything else in balance. So we're able to show that the ACE mannan dietary supplement mix was able to, number one, boost overall immune function according to the CD4 to the CD8 ratio, which is very important for all of us, not just for people with Alzheimer's. So that helper cell to cytotoxic cell ratio is a very important indicator of overall immune function. So that's number one. Number two was we were able to lower inflammation. Now, of course, that's in the blood. That's systemically, that's not necessarily inflammation up here. You know, we weren't able to go into the brain and actually look at inflammatory markers being secreted into the brain. I don't even know if you can even do that on functioning people, but nonetheless, it's let's call it a proxy of inflammation of the entire body that you would assume obviously has an impact on the brain. And so when you look at things like the two major ones that we found, TNF alpha and VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, those two things are, as you know, commonly looked at in heart disease and cancer. Our paper was probably the first one that showed an actual change in these two markers in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's. So being able to calm down that inflammation is obviously so important. You can't think of any chronic disease today without acknowledging the impact of inflammation on some level. So that's number two. Number three, we had an increase, just an incredible increase in our adult stem cell production according to CD14 cells. So again, you know, I mean, not just the CD14s, but all the different adult stem cells that we produce. The reason for our body doing this, of course, is we're replicating, we're replacing ourselves as we go through the life process or the process of living. And so one of the hallmarks of that, of course, is our ability to replicate, for our cells to replicate themselves. And of course, as we get older, that replication ability slows down to the point of when we do expire and we leave this plane. But nonetheless, in people that were just under 80 years of age, we showed almost a 300% increase in their adult stem cell making capacity. So that was just a tremendous finding. And it really, for us, it kind of solidified the relationship between the improvement that you mentioned, the clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function, and why that actually happened. So in light of not having the funding and the ability to do imaging of the brains to show the changes in the morphology of the brain, we're theorizing here that what was going on then was that the stem cells were migrating to the brain and either creating new neurons, other types of brain cells, new synapses, even repairing damage, maybe even clearing tau, plaques, tangles. I mean, you name it, could have been a lot of action going on there. We don't really, you know, again, that's theoretical. We don't know for sure. But nonetheless, that's the third thing that we saw happen. The fourth thing that we saw happen was an increase, although it was not statistically significant, but it still did go up, the brain-derived neurotropic factor. Again, this is another protein that's very important for creating memories. It helps us, our hippocampus to function properly. It's involved in the parts of the brain that recreates itself, this concept known as neuroplasticity. So that was obviously very important too. And then finally, the fifth thing that we've documented now is this relationship between two very significant components in the immune system, the Th1 and the Th2 ratios. This is kind of sort of grossly speaking, the relationship between what's going on the pro-inflammatory side in relationship to what's going on the anti-inflammatory side. So we were able to show that those ratios were balanced over the 12-month period, and then rebalancing those ratios was related to actually improvement in cognitive function, according to several different assessments that we took. So those are at least 5, if not more. I mean, maybe I could scratch my head or go back and read the papers and think of a few more, but those are at least 5 mechanisms, Dr. Mary, that we showed in all of our data across the 4 different papers we've published so far from this study, showing very strong, significant mechanistic findings about how and why this ACE-Mannan and this complex that we used was beneficial to people.
Wow. And I want to go back to the stem cells, because some of our listeners are going to be scratching their heads. They're like, wait a minute. I heard about my uncle going for stem cell injections and all this. Explain about the stem cells that we all have in our bodies.
So, as you well know, our body, again, through the bone marrow, it's constantly regenerating itself. It's creating these different types of, we call them pluripotent stem cells that are able, the body's intelligence is so amazing, right? I mean, it's got this inherent ability to know how to create a cell, and then how to tell that cell what to become, and then how to tell that cell not only what to become, but what its functions are. And it depends on if it's in the brain, or if it's in the heart, or the liver, or the skin, or the vascular system. I mean, it's just so incredible how our bodies work and how they function. But again, as I mentioned, when we're young, we have an injury, right? We're 10 years old and we break a bone or something, and we heal like that. Or, it's like kind of like, I can remember when I was a kid and I had several throat infections, and my pediatrician said, well, John, you may want to consider having a tonsillectomy. And I never did, but I ended up having it as an adult. And then I learned the reason why you don't do that as an adult, because when you're a child, your ability to recover and to make these stem cells so fast and to repair damage, whether it's from an injury or, in the case of a tonsillectomy, a surgery or something where your body is now putting together basically parts of itself again, where you've had that injury or you've had that forced trauma from a surgery or something. So as we get older, that capacity declines. And so anything that we can do, whether it's through exercise, overall nutrition, I mean, you and I haven't even gotten into those 2 topics really yet. Hopefully we'll do that in the future. But with supplementation with this ACE-Mannan, I mean, again, it's just got this incredible, it's basically like a signaling mechanism for the immune system. That's one of the ways I like to refer to it. So it's the body's ability to recognize this material, and then it says to itself, okay, I need to turn on these different things. And at least 5 of those that I mentioned just a moment ago are included in that list. But again, one of the most significant ones for healing and again, just to maintain whatever level of health we have is through the stem cell making process. So like you mentioned, a lot of, people now have open clinics around the world about taking different stem cells, whether it's, taking a piece of your tissue, your fat tissue, and then spinning that into a bunch of nutrients and then creating something that would be potentially healing. That's obviously one way of doing it. And I think that's one of the most common ways. But what we're talking about is even much more, I think, much more sophisticated than that. We're talking about introducing these materials, these nutrients into our body through our mouths. And then the body then takes that material and says, okay, I need more stem cells because I have neurodegeneration, I have heart issues, I have liver issues, I have skin issues, I have eye issues, whatever the case may be. The body's intelligence knows to send those stem cells to that particular site to then help to repair that damage or that trauma or whatever the case may be.
And so for our listeners, all these changes you described took place over a year by the addition of those very high quality nutrients. We call them micronutrients. But yeah, so what do the people get? Like 4 teaspoons a day?
Yes, so they were taking a powder. One of the concerns that we had, Dr. McDaniel and I had, was that I think it's around 20 to 30% of people with Alzheimer's have trouble swallowing. And
Right.
so we felt like, as opposed to a capsule or a tablet, a powder would have been the better format to give to people to allow them to mix it, with, of course, water or juice. But I think for me,
Right.
what I tell people is the best thing is, in my opinion, is a smoothie. You can blend it up with a lot of different fruits and veggies and nuts and seeds. You put your powder in there and you don't even taste it. I mean, it's like completely innocuous. But yes, we had people take 1 scoop, which is roughly a teaspoon, roughly 2.5 grams, every roughly 4 hours or so. So that's like
Okay.
basically 4 times per day.
Right.
Sometimes people said, well, this is really challenging for me to do that. So then we would say, okay, take 2 in the morning and 2 in the evening or something like that. But the
Right.
main thing was they needed to do at least 4 of the scoops per day. That was the main target dose for every day.
Wow. So by adding those 4 scoops a day over a period of 1 year, you saw these changes, these really
Correct.
significant benefits, and nothing else.
Correct. That was it. Again, we didn't change their medication,
That
their
was
diet.
it.
I'm
Right.
sorry. Pardon me.
Right. It's absolutely remarkable. It's remarkable.
It is. Well, and imagine if we had done other things. I mean, you kind of look at the functional medicine model where you go in and you look at all the different components of the body and how you can make different changes. I mean, this was not the functional medicine paradigm. This was just simply introducing a dietary supplement into the daily routine. That was it. And I'm certain if we had the capacity to add other things into the intervention, our results would have even been stronger. Although maybe, in the best case scenario, the way we did it was the best way, because what we've done is we've definitively shown that this dietary supplement was very powerful. Whereas if we had all these other things going into the mix, then, at the end of the day, maybe we couldn't have stood on the shoulders of the dietary supplement so strongly.
Exactly. No, and it needed to be done this way. It
Right.
really did. I would venture to say, because the research world doesn't value nutrition as they should. If they looked at this study, I mean, it should be turning a lot of heads
That's right. Well, and you and I have talked about
and
this
say,
offline.
just by adding, that's right.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Not at all. Not at all. It's remarkable. But what is it? What you're giving the body what it needs. And we talked about this in the last video. Is the body so depleted of nutrients today?
That's exactly right.
Our
Well,
soil is so depleted.
it's unreal, right? I mean, I was talking about this to a client earlier this morning about how these polysaccharides in particular, along with the other nutrients that we include in this formulation, are just so dynamic. And because it doesn't matter if you're vegan or carnivore or keto or paleo, I don't care what your dietary preference is, you're not getting them from your food. I mean, I don't know anyone who eats aloe vera, and even if you did, it wouldn't matter that much because of what we already discussed. And then, from the rice bran and the Dioscorea, the wild yam, some of the other polysaccharide components to the formulation, I mean, they're, hardly ever eaten as well. So you're talking about giving the cells that, this almost magical quality material that the cells just say, wow, it's like, it's like a surprise.
Exactly.
It's like, now I can function properly because I'm getting the things that I need to function properly. So it's just really dynamic. And I think that's why we see such amazing results every time, we help folks with this stuff.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned moving forward, you're raising funds for a larger study. What do you see as some of the parameters and things that really scientifically need to be looked at here?
Excuse me, this is a great question. So
A larger study.
yeah, so I think what we would like to do, and obviously we'll confer all this as a team, but one of the things that we would definitely love to do, I mean, besides testing the formulation again in a larger number of people, I think where we can really find maybe some different angles to the effects, if you will, is to look at certain other areas. So, for example, we would love to have like a genetic profile on people to really be able to get into some of this genetic story that's always so, what should you say? I mean, from a conventional perspective, people want to understand the genetic impact or the genetic effects. So being able to address the genetic question, at least on some level, I think would be very important for us. So that's definitely one assessment that we would like to make. Another assessment, of course, would be this relationship. I mean, we mentioned a little while ago about coming to a consensus on what causes Alzheimer's disease. So in our first study, we didn't look at anything like heavy metal exposure, for example. I mean, aluminum, obviously aluminum has been something that's been discussed as a contributing factor. So it would be very fascinating to take a hair sample of everyone and then look at what their heavy metal exposure is, not just aluminum, but all the different heavy metals. And then even taking that a step further and looking at some of these other environmental toxins, for example, like arsenic, glyphosate, PCBs, PBAs. I mean, there's a long list of these things that we're all getting exposed to now in our water and our soil and our air. So being able to attribute the disease process to some of these environmental exposures, I think would be very important as well. Next, of course, again, related to this notion of what's important in understanding this disease, is one of the big theories now is infection, right? Past infections, particularly things like herpes virus. So if you've had herpes, different forms of herpes, now it's being suggested that perhaps you're at greater risk of having Alzheimer's disease. So it'd be very interesting to look at different titers of some of the more common infections that we get exposed to throughout life, and then seeing if there's any relationship to the outcomes there. Of course, even if we didn't modify someone's diet or put them on an exercise program, just being able to look at those factors better, which we didn't even do in the first study. So, for example, looking at how they commonly eat, doing what is referred to as a dietary assessment, where we actually have a very good picture of what their daily diet is. So you collect that information over a week period, and then you do that every time you do an assessment. And then that way you can much better track how they're eating, and then what their other macro and micronutrient exposures or issues are. Very, very important. And again, we didn't do any of that in the first study. And then, of course, physical capacity. Now, if somebody is severely demented, we may not even be able to do any kind of an assessment on them. And I'm not an expert in doing physical functioning assessments on people with severe Alzheimer's, but it would be very fascinating to look at, physical capacity, and then see how physical capacity is also related to this concept of, causing or being sort of involved with the progression of the disease. So that's another area where, we really need to get some answers. And then I'm just thinking of lots of other biochemical things. I mean, we had a really nice panel of cytokines, growth factors, T cell subsets, B cell subsets, but there are lots of other things that we could look at as well. I think, some of this stuff like DNA damage, oxidation, NERF2. I mean, there are lots of sirtuins. I mean, there are lots of different things that we could look at. If we just had tons of money, and more money than we had common sense, it would be amazing just to run like a really, really large panel of biomarkers on these folks, and then see how those respond to the supplementation as well. So we have, big ideas, big goals. I mean, I think there are so many still unknown questions to be answered in this patient population that are so important, and so much of it, of course, is related to what again is close to mine and your heart, and that is nutrition, and how we can utilize nutrition to help improve all these things, and then again to make some sense out of some of this stuff, and then hopefully to generate some answers to our current questions, And then, of course, scientific discovery is such that as you answer one set of questions, then those answers lead to more questions, right? So hopefully we have a long
Absolutely.
track of, going down this path and just
That's right.
continuing to generate answers and questions and more answers and more questions.
Well, and all the things you talked about, this is a study for our time. It really is.
It
Because
is.
in the past, you didn't think, when I think about, like when our parents, and our grandparents, okay, you weren't thinking about soil contamination. You
That's
weren't
right.
thinking about heavy metal exposure. But today, we have to.
That's
It's
right.
it's
We
it's
have to.
not an option anymore. So if we're going to talk about any hope of, and again, we're not even saying to cure the disease,
Right.
but if we can offset the damage and improve quality of life, it's how can we not do this? How can we not examine all these factors? And it's really imperative.
I could not agree more. And especially, it makes me sad when I think of all the billions of dollars that have been sunk into drug discovery that
I
have
know.
basically, you call it wasted, squandered, whatever word you prefer. But when even just not even all that money, just a fraction of that money could have been given to us to extend the work that we've done, that we've already showed very promising results. If we could have just had a fraction of that just to continue our work over this last decade, where we really have been just stonewalled without any funding to support us. I mean, it's just really sad for me. It's sad that we haven't been able to do more than what we've already done, because I know that we would be way further along than we already are. And like you said, we're not trying to cure the disease, but we're trying to improve quality of life and to be able to provide some modicum of hope, because that was the one thing that the caregivers, I mean, if I remember anything just as a group from all the caregivers, it was this lack of hope, like they didn't have any hope for their loved one. And it
Yes.
kind of reminds me of just such desperation. I mean, it was really very stark. I mean, of all the different patient populations I worked with in my research career, I don't believe, I mean, whether you're talking about cancer or HIV or
Yes.
heart disease or liver disease or any of those others, the level of desperation was not even remotely close to what I experienced with the caregivers of people with Alzheimer's. I mean, it was another level.
Wow. And it makes sense because they say the caregiver is really becomes as much risk. I mean, they are literally the eyes, the ears, the hands, the feet, doing everything for this poor person who previously was very high functioning.
That's
And they
right.
cannot do anything.
That's
And
exactly right. You know what? And that actually reminds me, in one of our discussions years ago of planning and the next study, one of the
right.
ideas that we had, just because of what you just said, it jogged a memory that the caregiver of people with Alzheimer's is more affected both emotionally, psychologically, and physically than the caregiver of any other kind of patient. And so we had an idea where we would actually include the caregivers in the study as well. So give them the formulation and then also look at many of their biomarkers and their assessments of cognitive
Oh,
function,
oh, that
mood,
would be incredible.
right? I mean, we should actually create the study so that the caregiver gets taken care of too, not just the person that has the disease.
Exactly. You know what? You are right. Really? We need to do that.
That's
They
right.
say, as you just said, the caregivers for patients with Alzheimer's are worse off than
Any other
caregivers of
group.
any other group. And it makes total sense. And you know what? This is their loved ones. I see them with the spouses. They don't want to send them off to an assisted living or a group home,
That's right.
but they can only do so much.
Exactly.
But that is, okay, that's a light bulb. That's a really, really great idea to write that in and incorporate that. And it wouldn't take that much,
That's right.
but to give them the benefits of the nutrients and then track their progress.
That's right. Yeah, and it would be a
So,
much more comprehensive study, obviously, of that type.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. But it sounds like this is an idea whose time has come. It was
Truly.
there. It is. It was. In 2013, it was. And here we are. But it's again, our purpose of doing this is to raise awareness, educate people that, just to review, Dr. John, is it safe to say that conventional funding will not pay for a study like this that involves nutrition?
Unfortunately, Dr. Mary, it's very safe to say that. And as you know, in my history, I tried unsuccessfully several times with both NIH and Alzheimer's Association to take what
Yes.
we had showed. You know, it was not just an idea, but it was an idea with data. Take what we had showed and then say, hey, let's help this guy Lewis and his colleagues, and let's make something really happen here. And they didn't do it. So I think, based on my experience, and I hate to be a negative Nancy, if you will, but I don't think we're going to get it that way. I think we have all the listeners who hear our conversation. If they have the ability to help us, maybe connect us to somebody that they know that has a lot of, like a family fund, some kind of large pot of money that could go to good use in science, helping actual science work. I mean, I could, swear on my own grave that any penny that was contributed to our research would actually go to the research, not just to, enrich my life personally. I mean, I'm way beyond that. So this is, my call to help, for anyone to help
Absolutely.
us, that the money would be spent properly at the University of Miami, at a world-class institution where we would do the science very well. And I would assure anyone that their money would be very well spent, and they would help us create a legacy to hopefully do something about this disease, because obviously Big Pharma is not doing it. NIH is not doing it. Alzheimer's Association is not doing it.
Right.
Who is? Like, really, who is?
And I'll be honest with you, we've talked about this. The government institutions are, in a way, they're bound by the laws. Okay. Well, we still have a law in the books that says only a drug can claim to cure, treat, or mitigate a disease, which
That's
is
right.
an ancient law, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act of 1938. And they're still operating with, I'm not criticizing them, but the point is that law needs to be changed. And we're not
Amen.
claiming to cure, treat, or mitigate a disease. We're promoting quality of life and giving nutrients to people who are depleted of nutrients.
That's right.
It's a whole different paradigm. And I want to say this, Dr. John, for the listeners. I know I looked over your work in 2013. You were masterful. You were truly a steward of the resources that were given to you, and you made them stretch, because again, we said in the scope of the big picture, it was a small pot of money. And for a person, yeah, it was a big amount, but it was very small in the world of
Right.
research.
Well,
But
thank you
you
for
were.
that. I appreciate that, Dr. Mary. Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, I stretched every penny from that family that was so generous and so kind to give us that money. I mean, I tried my hardest to make sure every penny of that money was
Exactly.
spent well, and I think our results prove that.
They did. The results spoke for themselves. So now it's time to reach out and get larger funds so that you can have, as we say, a world-class study that examines all the things we've spoken about today that really were not able to be looked at with the first pilot trial, the first pilot study.
And actually, you know what? As we're talking, I just remembered I didn't mention one very important thing that we need to measure in this new study, and that is the imaging of the brain. I
Yes.
alluded to it in one other comment, but we really, I mean, to talk about definitive changes, we want to do CT scans. I'll leave it up to the radiology expert to determine which image we should use, but to have that morphology change of the brain would just, I mean, that talk about definitive, that's your definitive answer, right?
Exactly. Exactly. But again, that costs money.
That costs a lot of money. Exactly.
Exactly. And then we bring the expert on board to help discern which one or two imaging, which technology would be the best.
Right. Exactly.
And, but it has, you state, it has to be done. It has to be done. And then, as you said in one of our previous interviews, if it could open, if you could have a few more people studied, well, that would be absolutely phenomenal.
Absolutely. There's so much, Dr. Mary, there's so much we can do. I mean, you and I and Dr. McDaniel, you know, we have all these amazing ideas. We just need the support to do them. I mean, if we had the support, there's just no telling what else we could discover. I mean, it's just, it's like you know, it's like that. You look up in the tree, you see that mango, it's right there, it's ripe, it's ready to eat, but you can't, you can't grab it. That's how I feel about our next study. We have all these amazing ideas. We know exactly what to do. We just need the funding to execute them.
Exactly. But the first step is educating. So we're here, we are clearly educating to people. And again, like you said earlier, for our listeners, maybe you can donate a small amount, $10,
Absolutely.
$20, $50. It will make a big difference. So, because I know the tendency is we all think is, oh, well, I'm not a foundation. Well, no, most of us aren't, but a small amount with a large enough people. And then the goal is we will attract larger funders who can write larger checks, or foundations, that private foundations that will be more likely to fund something worthy that you're describing. This is a humanitarian crisis.
It really is. And I'd like to take a moment just to remind our listeners, if any of you have not had either a family member or someone close to you in your life that's had this disease, let me just share with you a couple of statistics that maybe will really bring this to light to you. So currently, Alzheimer's is somewhere around the 5th or 6th leading killer of Americans. It's actually the #1 killer of people in the UK, which is just, I mean, just really hard to believe. It's costing us somewhere around $500 billion per year of formal and informal care costs. It's affecting roughly 6 million Americans, I'm saying in Alzheimer's, and then there are another 8 million Americans that have some other form of dementia like vascular dementia or Lewy body dementia. So you're talking roughly 14 million Americans out of, what do we have today, 330 million or something. So by the numbers, you know, by the percentage of our population, it's not like diabetes or heart disease, but it's so expensive. It's so much more expensive than all these other diseases. And a lot of that, of course, is due to how the caregiver has to function and take care of his or her loved one. So, I mean, these numbers are just staggering. And as you mentioned, when we first started this conversation, the numbers are only going up. I mean, it's only exploding. So it's, I mean, there's no abatement to this. It just continues to increase every year with nothing, you know, to stop this gigantic wave that's ahead of us. And so we're not talking about just a humanitarian crisis from a personal point of view. We're also talking about a fiscal crisis, a financial crisis. I mean, it's literally just this disease could bankrupt us, let alone diabetes and cancer and heart disease and depression and all those other things. So I just wanted to reinforce that for a second, because I think it's important, if you haven't had a family member or, you know, someone that you've known that's had this disease, or known of a person who had a family member with this disease, just how terrible this is. And again, from a conventional medical perspective, there's basically nothing for these folks. So our goal is pure. The need is greater than anything you can imagine. And there's just so much that could be done, but we need your help.
Oh, we definitely do. We definitely do. It's like all hands on deck here. And again, if you can donate $10, 10, 20, 50, 100, and share with your family and friends. You know what? Church groups, civic groups, and in those members and dear friends who are afflicted with this devastating condition. So, well, this has been wonderful. Dr. John, thank you again. I mean, really, you're a pioneer. This is, and your first study was groundbreaking, absolutely groundbreaking. There's nothing else like it.
Thank you, Dr. Mary. I appreciate it. It was a lot of work, and it's still today the pinnacle of my research career, even though I'm no longer in excuse me, academics full time. But I mean, it's just the pinnacle of my career to date, and I want to do so much more. And I hope that we will generate enough of a wave of an interest to be able to do that.
Yes.
But I appreciate the kind words, and I it's still, every time I talk about this, or I think back to what we've published so far and what we continue to publish. As you know, we just published that fourth paper from the study here just in the last couple of months. We're almost finished with the third paper from our multiple sclerosis study. We hadn't even really got into that much yet, but we're hopefully going to have that published here in the next couple of months. So, I'm very much, I say all that to say that I'm still very much a scientifically focused person, even though, my maybe daily priority is a bit different these days. But nonetheless, for me, having a science base is so important to everything that I do in life. And so again, I just want to encourage, anyone listening to us to please consider helping us and advance this mission.